Getting something for nothing seems like a good deal, but there's a new strategy being used by drug manufacturers called Patient Familiarisation Programs, providing free drugs to patients that's raising some alarm bells.
What this means is that consumers on those patient familiarisation programs are the guinea pigs for testing fully how safe and effective these drugs might be once they're on the market. There are potential issues around how the data might be used for individuals, and that certainly concerns us. There's also an issue about whether the drug company concerned will report to the TGA and will alert health practitioners if there's adverse events associated with that product. And I suppose the other issue is really that if patients sign up to these programs and they're getting a drug free of charge from the sponsor, that may well be withdrawn if that drug doesn't get listed on the PBS. So essentially you've got a whole army of people out there who are enlisted onto a drug that hasn't yet been approved by the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, and if that approval doesn't occur, you could potentially end up with thousands of people who are on a drug that will not be subsidised and then left in the lurch if the company withdraws its support for that drug.
The drug that shone the spotlight on these patient familiarisation programs is a new type of anticoagulant. It was approved for supply in Australia by the TGA, but was yet to be approved by the government for a wide subsidy. They commenced a patient familiarisation program enrolling tens of thousands of patients. Many of those patients actively lobbied the government for the drug to be made widely available on the PBS and were alarmed when the decision didn't go in their favour and having to rely on the manufacturer to continue supplying the medicine for free or swapping to another type of anticoagulant. Now, in many circumstances, swapping from one drug to another won't have a health impact for the patient, but in the case of anticoagulants, the risks are significant.
And we have seen instances where some particular drugs have had safety concerns, in which case the PBAC has had some reservations about recommending them for listing on the PBS. In that instance, you know, it is a concern if consumers are being enlisted into programs where they get free access to medications that haven't yet had the tick of approval from the PBAC, because there may well be outstanding safety concerns which haven't yet been worked through.
These drugs are usually approved on fairly thin clinical trial evidence in small populations, and patient familiarisation programs at least are giving the opportunity to collect data in much larger populations. And yet we've heard that the manufacturer isn't actually collecting this data, and they've supplied the drug to something like 25,000 people.
There are very few parameters around what the drug company has to comply with when it comes to drug familiarisation programs. And that's a concern for consumers, because there are no parameters around the data that's collected on individuals, the data that's reported to authorities and to health practitioners when there are adverse safety issues associated with a medication, and there are no protocols around the sorts of safety concerns that might be in place. So I think you know, there needs to be a lot more done around looking at when patient familiarisation programs should be put into place for which types of drugs, particularly when there's safety concerns, and what some of the parameters around those programs should be, because at the moment they're very limited.
People are only getting access to this medication through their doctors. What should be the doctor's role in firstly ensuring that the medicine is safe, and secondly making sure that patients get all of the information they need to make the decision about whether or not to take the drug?
Look, it's really important, I think, that doctors talk with consumers and give them information about what they might expect when they sign up to these programs, so that consumers are well aware of some of the limitations of particular medications, the fact that they have not met with full approval to get through onto the PBS, any of the sorts of pros and cons that consumers can expect around, you know, some of the side effects, for instance, that a drug may have versus the benefits of taking that drug for their individual circumstances.
So what are the harms associated with each of those options?
We know that there can be a small risk of blood clots, okay? So it's important.
So I guess it's a case of really encouraging consumers to talk with their doctor about whether a particular drug is going to suit their individual purposes and whether or not it's worth signing up to a patient familiarisation program, even though the drug may well be withdrawn if it doesn't get through PBS approval processes.
And do people access the drug through the pharmacy?
My understanding is that the drug companies have protocols in place with pharmacies to provide access to those drugs. But, you know, I guess the issue is that there needs to be better discussion between pharmacists and consumers around some of the limitations of those particular medications and the benefits that there may be in an individual's circumstances.
And why would a doctor enrol patients, a patient, into a scheme like that?
Well, I suppose from a doctor's perspective, that if they believe that it's in the consumer's best interests and it should be in the consumer's best healthcare interests, they may well recommend that they sign up to one of these programs because, you know, it may be the only form of treatment that they can take for their individual circumstances. Certainly, there should not be any incentives provided to health practitioners for signing patients up to these kinds of programs. But they're the sorts of issues that we're concerned about. We want to see a strengthening of the protocols around these patient familiarisation programs to protect the consumers who do sign up to them.
So do you think there's enough transparency around that whole process at the moment?
There's absolutely not enough transparency around patient familiarisation programs, and that's a real concern for consumers because it leaves them out on a limb. And, you know, while they may have access to medication that they may find beneficial in the short term, if that's withdrawn in the longer term and there are issues around how that program operates, it leaves consumers very exposed.
So if you're considering enrolling in or have been enrolled in a patient familiarisation program, you may want to check with your doctor to ensure that you have all of the relevant information about the benefits and risks and whether or not the program is collecting data about safety and efficacy.